Thank you all. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? Okay. First of all, thank you all. You are extraordinary. Really fantastic. I must say, I connect a bit to what Nicole was saying before, because in the last 30 years, I really don't remember conferences on this topic or similar with such a large participation request. It was really a surprise, even for us, a very pleasant surprise, of course, because you truly give us the right energy to continue in this work, which is really exhausting. And so thank you. Give yourselves a round of applause, because you are truly extraordinary. Thank you. I say this without emphasis, honestly, but I believe you truly are the vanguard of a new Zeppapia, of a new time. Because from today, a new page of history begins to be written. Perhaps history, and I don't want to exaggerate, the true history of our distant past. Because thanks to what I have always defined as a new enlightenment, at the moment when it unites experimental archaeological research with advanced technology, creates a partnership that, in my opinion, is truly very effective, because based on scientific data, we can truly reconstruct, I would say, definitively, what happened in our distant past. This project, Project Khafre, we call it that at this stage. Then I'll explain why. It was born on a specific date. It is the 1st of September 2022, when a dear friend, Pino Morelli, whom I mention with great affection, wanted Professor Corrado Malanga and me to meet in Pescari. It was a wonderful 2-day event, also because when you are with Professor Malanga, with Corrado, there is always something to learn. So it was truly an extraordinary 2 days where we discussed some topics. They, Corrado and Filippo, were coming from the experience of studying the Pyramid of Cheops, which in my opinion was truly groundbreaking. And it is groundbreaking. While I, on the other hand, came from a research path that began in 2021 on the north shaft of the Queen's Chamber, which I was sharing at that time with Manu Safstrade, who is a Californian researcher, and with Jean-Paul Beauval, the brother of the more famous Robert, the author of the correlation theory. That experience was important because I am, so to speak, a bit like St. Thomas, in the sense that when I saw there's an extremely serious research project, I delve a bit into the details to see if there is any correlation with the research path I was following. And coincidentally, they were working on the Pyramid of Cheops, while I was studying a detail of that pyramid. This image refers to a section of the north shaft of the Queen's Chamber. We are precisely at the 4th block from the start of the shaft slope, the 7th from the entrance, where we had noticed a somewhat series of fragments on the floor of the conduit, which led us to imagine that the fragment shot onto the opposite wall, because they had tried from the outside to force it. In particular, it reminded me another passage that is little known, which is inside the chamber of the Great Pyramid, exactly in the entrance passage toward the antechamber of the King's Chamber, known as Cavia Passage, who dug, because he had found this hole, had sneaked in. And during the course of the digging, he found himself exactly at the height of the north shaft of the king's chamber. You can see the development of the shaft from that crevice. In this case, in the Queen's chamber, they had tried to force it, but what is very interesting instead is the upper part towards the 9th block of the conduit, where a gap, a tear, is indicated by these arrows on the right side of the wall. There too we find debris, so which are seen better here, making the tampering at that point evident. Moreover, among the debris we found an entrance ticket to the archaeological area of Giza that was in sale in the period between 1973 and 1991, and a small reel which we eventually discovered is film from a movie camera, as they used to call it then, of craftsmanship Russians. So evidently someone had entered that environment and left a mark of their passage. I believe, moreover, that these elements were not left there by chance. And so I wanted to delve into this detail to then understand at what height this area was located, and if this environment matched the reconstruction that Corrado and Filippo had made. Honestly, I don't know why, but this is one of the two areas you marked in green. It's not a coincidence, of course, because coincidence doesn't exist, but that room matches exactly with this area drawn in green in the reconstruction made by Corrado, Biondi, and Filippo. So it was the mathematical certainty, I would say, that the project they were working on and the technology they were using was perfect, precise, and that thanks to this technology, further steps forward could be taken in the research. So that's how fundamentally the Khafre Project was born, which is primarily a project about people, because we truly created an extraordinary cohesive group, almost to the point of telepathy. Truly a magnificent relationship was formed, and then I enrich myself day by day because I deal with geniuses, and therefore for me it is truly an extraordinary experience. As you all know, for those who follow me, that in 2010, during a conference held at Zayed University in Dubai, I presented my theory on dating the Zeppapia, which is a project that goes a bit beyond the correlation theory of Robert Bauval, from which I started. And why Robert had focused attention only on the pyramids and the Sphinx, dating the site to 10,500 BC, I wanted to take a further step. Having identified certain limits, both in the technical analysis of the alignments and in identifying all those possible elements present on the Giza Plateau that could provide an additional contribution to the research, and thus expanding the scope of analysis and proposing, let's say, a more coherent dating with what was present on the Giza Plateau. And so we arrived at 36,400 BC, where this set of elements of monuments, so I am not referring only to the three major pyramids and the Sphinx, but also to the mastaba of where the mastaba of Khentkawes is currently located, the tomb NC2, to the temple of Amenhotep II, and two temples at the foot of the Sphinx. In short, a whole series of elements that allowed me to define the Giza Plateau from east to west, aligning all these elements entirely with the celestial vault. There was a precise alignment. So I believe that date
can surely be the starting point for historically defining the Zeppapia. This study then led me to ask a second question. If this complex is so ancient, who could have built, realized it? Who made this blessed, extraordinary work?
And so here a path had to be chosen. And the way, in my opinion, most useful to also understand the consistency of the entire setup was to get into the mind of the serial killer, that is, who really created that structure, to understand how he thought, in what way he developed it from an architectural, engineering, and not only that, also scientific point of view, using, let's say, more complex and broader terminology, to understand what the communication systems of this civilization were. We can obviously refer to a form of phonetic communication, but the problem is that in the pyramids of Giza, there isn't a shred of a hieroglyphic, and I don't consider Weiss's scribble that is in one of the chambers, the so-called dumps of the Zepp. By now, it is known to everyone that it's a fake. So what could have been the other communication system? The language of numbers, the universal tool, the tool of universal language, because through numbers, codes are communicated that transcend space and time. Another important aspect was the study of astronomy, because through this tool it was not only possible to date the site, but it also gave us additional elements for evaluation in light of what was emerging from an ongoing research, connections not just with the surface but also with the other world. Let's define it that way. The underworld, as the English say, which step by step was coming to the light, just like geometry, but also the analysis of the archetypes that emerged from the very creation of some monuments built on the Giza Plateau, as we will see shortly. For example, in the Valley Temple, which is one of the two temples, the one on the right, located beneath the Sphinx. So, entering the mind of those who created that structure was fundamental. And this was thanks to the study of various authors, such as, for example, George Hart, who is an archaeologist who worked at the British Museum. Let's say a series of publications on the various deities of the Egyptian pantheon, and in particular on Thoth, the deity called Thoth, which seemed to be not only very interesting for the aspects it analyzed, but seemed to be the deity most closely related to the construction of the entire structure of Giza. And so I started from there to delve deeper into this topic and understand how much Thoth could be connected to the entire framework of Giza. And gradually a whole series of elements emerged that we will see shortly, but above all, it became necessary, so to speak, during the course of our research, to delve deeper into certain details on site that could be useful for the research. And so, within the context of the Egypt Unveiled tour, so to speak, we combined business with pleasure, in short, right? So we went to Egypt to evaluate, to visit the Giza Plateau, and in particular the pyramids and monuments that have been most important, essentially, that were built in that area, but also to take a peek at some elements concerning both the Pyramid of Khufu and the Pyramid of Khafre. I won't talk about the Pyramid of Menkaure, perhaps we'll do that another time, but I can hint that there are some very, very interesting things there too. Regarding the Pyramid of Cheops, the first thing I want to analyze with you are these blocks
located on the north facade of the pyramid, and in the section leading to the entrance of Al Mamun. So what was, let's say, forcibly created from the inside. Therefore, anyone who tells you that this entrance was made from the outside is essentially stating an inaccuracy for a whole series of reasons. The first is that he must have had outrageous luck to find that entrance right at that point. In reality, it comes from underneath, and later we will see from where. And so these blocks show deep traces. They are in sandstone, deep traces of water erosion, and only on some blocks of the north facade and on some blocks in the northwest corner of the Great Pyramid. And these 32 points I analyzed. And this means that already in around, let's say, 10,500, then the period to which he attributed the alignment, probably during that period something happened that demolished part of the covering that characterized the Great Pyramid, exposing these blocks to water erosion, because then that area was submerged over time by seawater. In short, therefore these traces of water erosion were very, very important. This, however, is the plateau in front of the east face of the Great Pyramid. It is limestone paved area, and I can assure you that this plateau, it is made up of blocks so large that they did not even fit into the camera. They were so extensive, perfectly worked, perfectly cut, and aligned with each other, surrounding the entire structure. And later you will understand why this detail is important when Professor Corrado Malanga speaks. And this characterization of the base of the Pyramid of Cheops is also found in the Pyramid of Chephren and the Pyramid of Mykerinos, and as well in the area of the Sphinx. Another interesting aspect, it was Filippo who asked me for information about the Grand Galleria. What you see here is a detail of the entrance right in the Great Gallery, meaning practically when you exit the ascending shaft looking up, there is this granite block that obstructs. A hole is practically a plug that probably leads somewhere else that at this moment we do not know or have not yet seen physically. And it is located exactly at this point you see in the white circle, which corresponds precisely to what Corrado and Filippo identified in their reconstruction of the interiors of the Great Pyramid that you see here in the red circle. Then there is another very interesting element. And Filippo had asked me to pay particular attention to this because it is a hole that has been sealed with this block of granite. And this point is exactly at the highest part of the wall, east of the Grand Gallery, right at the top. And there is another obstruction that definitely leads to some other chamber they reconstructed in their work on the pyramid, on the Great Pyramid. And then we come to the King's Chamber. Cool. At this point, there's that famous opening towards the chamber below the one that is right beneath the King's Chamber. On that occasion, I spent time with the two custodians who are inside the chamber, basically, who manage the flow of access to that area. We engaged in a brief chat actually, but I asked some very specific questions about the environment below. After a moment of, let's say, their embarrassment, and they were also a bit reluctant, so to speak, to talk about it, gradually interesting things came out. So, probably all of you have already seen this image. It is a wall that is obviously not from the Egyptian period. Here, this wall was built during the 1980s in response to my precise question about what the need was to create this obstruction. They revealed to me that beyond this wall there is a corridor that goes down for several meters. Then it splits into another passage that goes upward. This detail about it going upward is important.
And then this conduit leads further down to a well.
So there is a well at the end of this path. It is very likely that whoever explored that chamber we saw earlier in the tunnel, when I talked to you about the northern tunnel of the Queen's Chamber, passed right through that opening and took the direction upwards and entered that environment. So it is from there that they passed. And let's move on to the Pyramid of Khafre. The visit to the Pyramid of Khafre was very interesting because, in truth, it was the first time I accessed that monument. It has a different layout compared to the interiors, at least the ones we know. Then we will show you the others later. It has a different layout compared to the Great Pyramid. It is interesting to note that at the end of the descending passage, from the entrance to the end of this passage, once the passage is finished, you enter a horizontal passage that is also quite tall. In fact, I could stand upright, unlike the descending passage, which was a bit difficult for me to go down because it is low, around 1 meter in height. There is this niche. What you see here inside the niche is a contraption from Scan Pyramid that is detecting the famous muon particles in the hope of catching one and reconstructing a bit of the internal environment according to their technology, which, for goodness sake, we respect, but I mean, at least I believe it is, let's say, not very effective in uncovering the secrets that monument holds. This niche is actually here, in the reconstruction you see in here, in the graphic reconstruction, the position of the niche relative to the duct going down isn't exactly precise because it is located right in front of the door, which leads to the second known chamber of the Pyramid of Khafre. We would have liked to explore that area, but how should I say? We were denied access. I won't hide from you that we also tried to push our way in, but it wasn't possible. So it means that down there, not only are there the machines of the Scan Pyramid, but I hope they haven't done the same damage they did a few years ago in the Queen's Chamber of the Great Pyramid, where they even drilled the floor to check if there was an environment beneath the Queen's Chamber, like in the case of the King's Chamber. So, in any case, we were not able to explore it. This instead is a detail of the horizontal shaft that leads to the chamber of Belzoni, which can be accessed by going up a short ascending passage that leads further up towards this other horizontal corridor that leads into the Belzoni chamber. Here too we are on the left wall, proceeding towards the so-called funerary chamber. And I have identified this detail, the block which I will highlight better for you here. And this too seems to be a plug that obstructs an opening because it is completely shaped in a way entirely different from the others, which are much more linear. So it is possible that behind this plug there might be something interesting. And this instead is another niche located a few meters above. This niche is very interesting because the inner block is pink granite, while the one that blocks it is a block of sandstone. It blocks it because it blocks it in the sense that it's not possible to extract it without removing the piece above. So it's possible that this particular feature of the block of granite compared to this sandstone that characterizes the conduit, it may hold some surprises. Finally, we got in Belzoni's chamber. We entered Belzoni's chamber, which is something nice, exactly 207 years after its discovery, because it was March 2nd, 1818 when Belzoni entered it, whereas we entered on March 2nd, 2025, so it was very nice. And there is something very interesting in this chamber because these two images give you an idea of the existence of two shafts. These are the opposite walls and are exactly corresponding, but there is another element that seems very interesting, which is this hole that has been made in the upper corner of Belzoni's chamber on the left of the entrance. It is interesting to note because corresponding to this hole on the opposite wall, maintenance work was done there and is evident. Probably there were two other shafts that characterized this space. Obviously, we will try to verify this if possible because it seems to me that it is not extremely simple to do this also because they are very, very small conduits. However, the interesting thing is that in this chamber, compared to the king's chamber and the queen's chamber in the Pyramid of Cheops, it presents a pair of shafts, a double pair of shafts. Another very interesting thing, I noticed it while examining the surviving blocks of the flooring of Belzoni's chamber near the so-called basin. Well, academics call it a sarcophagus. For us, it's a basin. For me, it's a basin. Because these blocks that are around the container have holes well defined. And I must say quite deep. They are about 7 or 8 centimeters, if not a little more. Rightly, Professor Malanga pointed out to me that these were very likely blocks used to insert rods, poles like that, to slide the lid and then eventually pull it back and close it again. And so even these blocks, these details, have a very useful peculiarity that also, let's say, aligns with this idea we have of the function of these monuments. Finally, this is a small detail. It is a limestone block that is located in a niche right at the end of the descending passage. That seems to be the closing door of that, which essentially separates the descending passage from the first horizontal passage. Finally, the Great Pyramid is rarely talked about, but in reality, this monument has been particularly studied using technology. First of all, we said that it was, so to speak, explored by Belzoni in 1818, and later by Perrin, Weiss's friend, who is the author of the little drawings in the relieving chamber of the Z. they explored this monument, but actually one of the first and most interesting experiments was carried out in 1967 by Professor Luis Alvarez, who later in 68 was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. And already in 1967, this famous moon technology was used. On that occasion, considering the equipment they had at the time, they didn't succeed in 2025. In 1967, they managed to explore only a small volume of the pyramid, about 18%, naturally with negative results. Other experiments have been conducted by both CERN and the University of Riga. And this latest study that was conducted on the pyramid is very interesting, because as part of an engineering symposium, in short, it was fundamentally unrelated to archaeological research. Fractures were identified in the northeast area of the pyramid, along some courses toward the base. According to these researchers, it suggests or hints at the possible internal collapse, therefore in empty spaces. From this, it was deduced that there could be unexplored areas inside the Pyramid of Khafre. Another temple, another very interesting monumental complex, is the one near the Sphinx. In particular, I had the opportunity to analyze some structural elements inside the Temple of the Valley, which is the one located to the right of the Sphinx. Why? Because practically this temple presents a dual structural characterization made of sandstone blocks. This is an image taken from the southeast corner of the temple. You see these enormous sandstone blocks that form the entire perimeter, and that show, let's say, deep traces of erosion. And then there is an internal part that is made of granite. In the academic version, this temple would have been maintained during the period during the Old Kingdom, therefore during the reign of Khafre, to whom this temple is attributed. And it is attributed to Khafre not because there is any archaeological evidence proving this link between Khafre and the Valley Temple, but simply because it was found in a well, a diorite statue of Khafre, actually upside down. So let's say, from this discovery, let's say that the equation was born like this: Temple of Khafre, Pharaoh Khafre. In any case, what is interesting is the size and the cut of these granite blocks, which are enormous. I believe that even here, the largest ones weigh around 70-80 tons. Moreover, with an extremely, let's say, precise conjunction. In addition to a cut, this piece of granite has been specifically cut to form a curve that matched with the other sides. So truly a technology that during the Old Kingdom period, and particularly during the 4th dynasty, is not objectively recognized to the Egyptian civilization, which at that time still used wooden mallets and copper chisels. So working granite, because to work granite, something much more was needed. One thing that has always intrigued me is the shape of the Valley Temple. And here you see a graphical projection of it. Valley Temple that, how to say, has always given me the sensation of something different from the design of a temple. It almost looks like how to say, a plate for how to say, electrical transmission, then if more circuit, let's say, microchip, a circuit.
What is interesting, though, as I was telling you before, is to use the syntax of thought, enter the mind of the serial killer, and analyze the simplest elements that come to our eyes. Because, let's say, the only way to convey a message in the future is to use a very simple language. So, what do we see here on the left? We see a kind of fork with 3 prongs.
So we have a number 3.
Then you also see the development of the colonnade. Here too, there are a series of columns that give us a number. Practically, there are 16 columns at the base forming this temple. So practically the sum of 7. And then we have an element here on the right, which is indeed formed by a niche. That's the one you see at this point,
Where there is the number 1.
So the numbers that come out are 3, 7, and 1.
which coincidentally seems to be an anagram of the number 137. And this already seemed like, let's say, an incentive to delve deeper into this game. Now, in the archetypal reading of these elements, it was not difficult to associate this number 3 and that shape of the number 3 with this letter, which we find, so to speak, in the Hebrew alphabet, which is the Shin, which in itself gives you this meaning of the transforming form of a man reincarnating into a new life. So we are beginning to have, so to speak, a small detail about what the Valley Temple could convey as a meaning. Another interesting aspect, however, is the shape of the one that reminds us of the Tao. And here too, in its, shall we say, archetypal meaning, there is something that brings us, so to speak, both to the reincarnated and to the completion of an extraordinary work. And it is equally interesting to note that the development of the temple seems to recall instead another letter, which is Zain, which practically gives us this concept of immortality. So all these elements combined led us during our study, which we were developing with the underground of Giza, to the city of Amenti and its symbolic function in ancient texts, in the Book of the Dead, in the Book of the Hidden Chamber. Amduat, in the pyramid texts, speaks of a city of the dead over which Osiris reigned. City that envisioned, so to speak, a journey during the 12 hours of the night that are referenced in the Amduat, during which the soul of the pharaoh would pass to be reborn into new life and re-enter the Amduat. The interesting thing, however, that I wanted to understand was why this 371 and they did not reverse the symbols to then bring them back to 137. Now, there are many formulas, different mathematical formulas, arithmetic, mathematical basically, that can be applied to this number, which I wasn't really interested in because I was actually focusing on the symbolism. To that symbolism that could use connect mathematics, or at least the elementary symbols of arithmetic with Egyptian symbolism. And the only formula applicable to this number that could be connected to the cross, no, the Ankh, which is in the hands of the gods, symbol of life and symbol of life in the afterlife, was the function of sigma. The sigma function, which is a function, you see it here, applied to all the natural divisors. What does it return for this number? This is really interesting. I believe that chance does not exist. The result of the sigma function applied to 371 gave us 432. No fimbado. So we had found, I found another code that combined with 137 conjugated space-time with immortality and gave us an indication of what might be beneath the Giza Plateau. I will move on quickly because we have limited time. A little bit more.
So this
Further element, this further code that emerged from the interpretations of these symbols and allowed me to, do you remember, enter the mind of the serial killer and read the syntax of their thoughts, inevitably pushed me to delve deeper. Another text that is particularly controversial is the famous Emerald Tablets. We all know the story of the Emerald Tablets. In short, the origin is not considered a reliable text by the academic community, perhaps rightly so, because the original of this text has never been found. But this text also tells us things that are very, very interesting. Of this book, during the work we are doing, I only consider the descriptive aspects of the city of Amenti, so leaving aside everything else that interests us little at the moment. Maybe we will analyze it when we have an even clearer idea of what is emerging from this work of research. However, the Emerald Tablet started to have, so to speak, a very interesting role, to the point that I said to myself, you see, we haven't found it. This text, the original isn't there, but maybe we can give it a historical sense only through the reconstruction of what we are finding. And from here, as you might say, a series of explorations emerged that we wanted to conduct on some elements of this book. And so one evening with Filippo, we focused on the 15th tablet of the Emerald Tablets, because there we identified a language. Unknown. A language that gave us no coherent answer. And so we analyzed these sentences that made up this text. Moreover, it should be repeated according to the instructions of thought, like a mantra to experience, let's say, in other dimensions. These are the sentences. I'll list them quickly for you. We examined them, and looking at them more closely, they did not provide any, any answer. They truly seemed like phrases, letters placed randomly. However, upon closer analysis, let's say they gave us some resonances that reminded us, on one hand, of some, phrases or resonances with the Mesopotamian language, therefore Sumerian, and others that instead gave us resonances with Proto-Semitic languages. From here, we decided to further study these texts and syllabicate them correctly. And so we identified, let's say, the best formula, which is this one, to read them and to give, so to speak, a complete sense to these phrases. Let's see what the first one means. Dor el il-la means the temple of Thoth as a tool of the spirit. Read the translation carefully and you will understand why we are heading towards Amenti. There, Umgang means the tool of the spirit. Remember the work by Professor Malanga and Filippo on the Great Pyramid? The tool of the spirit makes people free and aware. Cut or detach from the material to serve the divine. Praise the Son of God, or the deity in general, rock on which to write the works of the kingdom. So let us remember Thoth's function in the Emerald Tablets and all that it tells us. The primordial spiritual entity forges the divine spirit.
So we had identified a series of elements that pushed us even more to consider that what was coming out from the underground of Giza could actually be something that could be associated with the city of Amenti. Now, about the etymology of the word Amenti, in reality, as it were, we have in the Egyptian texts a reference to a deity, which originates, let's say, in the Middle Kingdom, called Event. Event, the final double T generally indicates a feminine form, and or Amenti. So, because in the Egyptian language, vowels do not exist except in the famo at the beginning of the word. So we started trying to understand if the same Amenti could show us something more and be certain that what we were seeing could really be Amenti. Actually, divided in a certain way, the word Amenti means seed or water of the divine power of life. So the divine power of life, water, as the basic element of this entire framework, united with 137, which in archetypes means entry into the house of life, it made us think that while Khafre could represent the entry into the divine house of life, Amenti was the place described in ancient texts. There are then a whole series of other elements that you can read here in the slide.
Or characteristic elements.
The city of Amenti. There are two things you will see next. These two enormous areas that were identified during the surveys with the SAR, which are specifically mentioned in the descriptions of the emerald tablets. These two large environments, infinite like space. So we are identifying two large chambers that are, let's say, truly as far as the eye can see. There is another thing described in the emerald tablets related to the construction of Amenti. At a certain point of during the construction phase, deep wells were created to bring light and life from mines. It is described this way in the emerald tablets. The Giza Plateau is characterized by for those who, I don't know how many of you have had the pleasure of visiting that area, but on the Giza Plateau there are many wells that were made in the distant past. They are definitely not of dynastic craftsmanship. That characterize those areas both near the pyramids and in spaces even further away. And I am referring in particular to the area northwest and southeast of the Giza Plain. So actually there was some other element in the description of the halls of Amenti, in the construction of Amenti, that seemed to match with what we were observing during the surveys. Finally, another aspect that seems really very interesting to note is that in the concept of the afterlife of Egyptian civilization, there are references to Amenti, references to the Rostau, and references to the Duat. Now, the Egyptian civilization is characterized by the concept of duality. Yeah, we find duality in the spiritual part, basically in the conception of time, linear time, circular time, and the jet, as well as in everyday objects that were used.
Exactly.
Even in the simpler aspects of daily life. Here, however, it seems that it goes beyond duality, which is not something too little. Where we have Amenti, which is the afterlife, the one we have been looking at for some time, there is Rostau, which refers to the surface of Giza, where the pyramids, Sphinx, and so on are located, and then the Duat, which is the counterpart in the celestial vault.
So we are in the full application of the principle as above, so below, as above, so below, which we find in the philosophy of this deity called Thoth.
And here,
And then I'll close. What is the relationship between Giza, Zeppapia, and Amenti?
In reality, we can, as I was saying at the beginning, perfectly understand what is the construction and architecture of Giza only if we study it in its entirety. So from east to west, do not focus only on the pyramids or only on the Sphinx or only on the two Mensitu and so on, but we can understand its complexity only by analyzing it in its entirety. So from east to west, and at this point also from bottom to top. So while in the east we have the Sphinx as the guardian of life, at the symbolic sunrise, thus life that develops from the sun along the ecliptic. But our daily life, the life of the pharaoh, his daily routine, so the guardian of birth, then we have the entrance to the west, Imentet, Amenti, the goddess of the western hill, a symbolic place of death for the ancient Egyptians, then the path along the city of Amenti, in the underground of Giza, until reaching the Sphinx again, to materialize that concept of birth, death, and rebirth, that is an integral part of the entire spiritual and religious structure of ancient Egypt. And here I will be silent and pass the word to my colleagues, thanking you all for your attention. Thank you.
It works. It's normal. Yes, yes.